All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our latest ALTA Insights webinar. I'm Jeremy Yohe, ALTA's Vice President of Communications, and today we've got a very interesting presentation lined up to dig into the latest cyber and wire fraud trends. As you know, I've always got a few housekeeping items before we get started. Just as a reminder, today's webinar is recorded. You'll get an email with a link to the recording, and you can always access our archives of our webinars at alta.org/webinars. You can download a copy of the presentation from the handout section in the Go to Webinar window pane. Anytime you have any questions, submit them in the questions box. We'll hold a little time at the end for Q&A. I do need to thank Old Republic for sponsoring today's webinar. And before introducing today's speakers, we have a short message from Old Republic.
Looking for a title insurance underwriter you can rely on? Look no further. Since 1992, Old Republic Title has consistently held the highest overall financial strength ratings in the industry. Why should that matter to you? Our rock-solid financial foundation allows us to navigate the ups and downs of any market with ease. Our title agents choose to work with us not only because of our stability and financial security, but because we're invested in their future. But don't just take our word for it. Our reputation speaks for itself. We're trusted by clients and respected in the industry. Choose Old Republic Title, where excellence is standard.
Okay, all right, thank you, Old Republic. All right, Tom, let me make you the presenter and you can get your screen set up. And then while you're doing that, I will introduce everyone. All right, joining us today, we have Tom Cronkite. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Tom. He is the co-founder and CEO of CertifID, which provides software to protect against wire fraud. He's also the co-founder and CEO of Michigan-based Sun Title. Tom is a licensed attorney, frequent national speaker on cyber fraud, real estate, and financial topics, and also serves on ALTA's Information Security Work Group. And Tom has been able to recruit a few additional experts to join us today. First, we have Matt O'Neill. Matt is founder and partner of 5-0 Consulting, which helps companies in the financial services space with fraud prevention. And prior to co-founding the consulting firm, Matt served as managing director of the U.S. Secret Service. And also joining us today is Stephen Doherty. Stephen has over 15 years of investigative experience and is currently a financial fraud investigator with the U.S. Secret Service. Jokingly, I've heard Matt and Steve aren't allowed in the same room together, but fortunately, we've got them both for today's webinar. Tom, I'm not sure how you were able to achieve this, but nice job. And I'll turn it over to you.
No, Jeremy, thank you. And thanks to Matt and Stephen taking time out of their busy days. And thank you for Old Republic and ALTA just to shine light on an ever important topic. I know we've had many conversations about wire fraud, but this one in particular, over the last 12 months, there's just been a shift based on new technologies and new fraud vectors that Matt, Stephen, and I will dive into. By way of housekeeping, Jeremy, if they have a question, does that go into the question panel or chat? Where do you want that?
Either one, wherever they want to pop it in. I watch both, so.
So we've asked Jeremy, we only have a few slides today, and this is really meant to be more of a casual but intimate conversation around what we're three seeing. We all see this issue from different seats right now. The background of Matt and Stephen is absolutely phenomenal, and they'll get into that a little bit more. But the purpose of today is a quick overview, kind of by the numbers. This isn't going to be a facts and figures conversation. This is going to be more of a trend line conversation, and leaving with a discussion around, well, where does this leave us in the title space? How do we think about cybersecurity and incident response and wire fraud protection and now data security at a higher level? because it just feels like, especially in the last 6 months with all of the data breaches with mortgage servicers, and some underwriters and title companies, it's like, where's the safe harbor in all of this? So I'll jump in real quick. The IC3 report, for those of you that are not familiar, the FBI has an Internet Crime Complaint Center. It kind of serves as the top of the funnel and the intake for cyber crimes nationally. Cyber crimes range from business email compromise to data theft to investment fraud to elderly abuse scams. I could go on and on. Their report was published a couple weeks ago. And in 2023, you can kind of see the numbers here. There was a fraud reported every 28 seconds of the entire year. So that's kind of like around the clock, every 28 seconds. 12.5 billion in losses just due to cyber. Matt and Stephen, I think both of you would agree that's a fraction of what's actually happening. And I don't know if you guys want to kind of speak to those numbers real quick.
Yeah, hey, good afternoon, everybody. So yeah, I do think that it is a fraction from everything that we saw when I was with the U.S. Secret Service in working with Stephen on the Global Investigative Operations Center. We probably less than 10% is actually reported to the IC3 because, quite frankly, it's hard to navigate to. A lot of people don't even know it exists. So that's kind of the first sort of area. The other thing that's alarming about these numbers is when we started the Global Operations Center for the Secret Service in 2017, Stephen, I think the number was like 4 billion in reported losses to the IC3. We're at 12 billion. So that just tells us whatever we're doing to help combat fraud, we need to do a better job collectively.
And what I find interesting with these numbers is, so previously it was every 42 seconds the IC3 got a report. It's now down to every 28 seconds. Right? Imagine the math that you have to take and do to get that number to drop down like that in terms of reporting. It's good on one end in that we're getting more reporting, but it's bad on the other end in that these things are happening more and more at scale. And really what I want to stress today is we're seeing the ultimate industrialization of cyber fraud. It's not just nebulous groups we're going after. These are full-scale, large-scale operations being done with thousands of people.
Why do you think, other than I don't know where to report, right? So you brought that up, Matt, but what would be the next 2 reasons why these numbers just are not accurate? Meaning, why would so much go unreported?
I'll take a stab at the first ones. The first is because there's probably some level, depending on what the fraud is, there's a level of embarrassment, especially with other exploitation abuse. A lot of folks are reluctant to report it because they're afraid that their freedom's going to be taken away, their financial freedom's going to be taken away. There's a certain level of embarrassment also when it comes to romance scams and other sort of similar type fraud types. And so the first one would be, I think, just a lack of and also, so that's the first one, is just they not wanting to report it because they don't want other people to know. And there could be some business reasons why somebody wouldn't want to report. And that's the first component. The second component, I think, in talking to victims is they didn't think it would matter to report because these, they recognize, they probably might have done some research and thought, oh, well, these folks are located in Myanmar or they're in Nigeria or somewhere. And what's the point? I already lost the money. So those are my top 2. Stephen, what do you think?
So I had a very interesting conversation, Matt, with actually a very close office of ours that we've worked with a bunch. Several weeks ago, they were presenting at another cybersecurity conference. And the Secret Service, we have a program called Nitro. It's our network intrusion response program, where if you are a victim, particularly business, we will come out to your business and help you mitigate the compromise, find out where the compromise occurred, see if we can get any cyber artifacts out of it and try to make everybody whole. Is our goal. But we've actually run into an obstacle where businesses are reticent to contact us or to contact law enforcement in general because they're afraid we're going to come in and rip out all their servers, come in with 40 guys in jackets and totally disrupt their business. But that's not the case with that. But that's one of the big obstacles we run into. So they don't want to report it because of that instance. Also, general counsel can get involved and not want to report it for different legal reasons. There's a lot of different reasons on that sense that businesses don't report it, especially when it's large scale fraud. But one thing that we really stress, and I think we'll hit this a bunch during this, is that reporting is key, guys. Everything that we can get out of this by reporting is just essential. I can't tell you how many times we were able to save other victims from tremendous loss just by one company reporting an attempt or a small loss, because we're able to hop on that intelligence. And our goal with the Secret Service is obviously to arrest these bad actors, right? But we also want to disrupt and dismantle their networks. So again, by reporting, it's key for that. So that's one of the things we run into as an obstacle of why these numbers are definitely much lower than they should be.
And
Hey,
just to put a,
sorry, let me jump in here. Your mention of nitro piqued the interest of some people on the webinar. I don't know if you want to spend a minute or two just to touch on that again and what that entails.
Yeah. So in all of our field offices, we have 42 different major field offices across the country and the world. In those field offices, we have what's called cyber fraud task forces. And every cyber fraud task force has a nitro component attached to it, generally a network intrusion forensics team that can come out and look and see what compromise occurred and how to mitigate it. Again, we come out, we try to be as less invasive as possible. Most of the time we show up, we have one external hard drive and we say, hey, let's just get the audit logs for this, or let's check your email system to see if there are email rules. So we try to keep things very simple, quiet, and quick for you guys.
If a title company was interested in going down that road, how would they get connected with Nitro?
Yep, secretservice.gov/field offices. That's all you have to do. In all of our field offices, we have people there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Pick up the phone and call them and tell them what you got going on, and they will get somebody routed to you that can handle that problem. Or they can email further up to the chain to the JIOC, where we have subject matter experts who can help with that as well.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Two threads I want to pull, guys. One, it's important. What we found is we've handled so many recoveries working with JIOC. Matt, when you were there, at Post and with Stephen, and there's a network effect of reporting, because there's so many times where we'll find a receiving account at a financial institution, and then you can see activity from other victims that have landed in that account or have been outbound. So it's like a pay it forward in a lot of respects. Same thing with email addresses and IP addresses, the IC3. I mean, if you can download that metadata and you can get them some of those digital insights, they're likely connected to something else that has been reported or that they're seeing at scale.
Yep, I had one last week. I was supposed to be on vacation. I was trying to get into the Monterey Bay Aquarium with my 3-year-old and 3-month-old, and I get a frantic phone call from one of our field offices saying, hey, a large hospital in our region got hit for $900K for a BEC. I'm like, when did it happen? And they're like, oh, it was 2 weeks ago, so we don't expect much. I'm like, I'm still gonna run this money down. Don't worry, let's see what I can do. I contacted the financial institution. The financial institution was like, hey, we're gonna have a good recovery here, because that same account was used in an attempted BEC and was reported to us just before that money came in. So the money came in and we locked down the account. So we'll get that money back to the victim. So shows how important reporting is. Even something that's a week or two old can be saved based on reporting.
Great example.
Stephen, what about time? I think one of the things that you always do a good job of is explaining how, if organizations do what we used to call the Super Bowl of finger pointing before they decide to even reach out, what statistically, what are you seeing as far as the need? Obviously, that was an outlier to some degree. You probably agree as far as collecting it 2 weeks later. But what's the ideal time, aside from like immediately? Like what time frames would you recommend people reporting?
So that one was definitely an outlier, but 72 hours used to be the benchmark. If you could get it to us within 72 hours, there was a good chance we could help you and do something to get your money back. However, with the way technology has evolved, that number has dropped significantly. It went down to 48 hours. Now it's at about 24 hours, even possibly 12 hours. So the money moves so quickly now with real-time payments that we'll probably touch upon, with cryptocurrency. You can move money in and out of accounts so much faster than, say, having to wait a day or two to go into a bank to set up a wire and have it sent out. So with all that, it just makes it that much faster. So reporting quickly is key. We always say, hey, if you get hit by one of these, privacy and blame goes out the door for a little bit, right? It just has to be. It's one of the things. So don't finger point, have your law enforcement contact, reach out as quickly as possible, and get the word to us so we can start helping the process of a potential recovery.
I think that's where we're going to go all over the place here, guys, you attendees. So this is going to be the next 45 minutes, not quite. but that's where a good incident response comes in. I'm going to put a pin in that. The other thing about reporting, just to close, that chapter, is sometimes you have a duty to report to your cyber carrier and then they take over the incident response. But I think you still encourage them to timely report and try to collect, because who knows, to your point, Stephen, it looks like that account was damned, right? So it was receiving money, but nothing was going outbound. That spigot was shut off and they had a good recovery where there should have been no chance. It feels like with the movement of money, and as we've worked through with our fraud recovery services team at CertifID, they're just more sophisticated on the money laundering side in 2023 going into 2024 than what we saw early days, Stephen and Matt, when we connected in 18. It just feels like we're in a different space. And I don't know, but yet I don't think there are fewer romance scam victims. I don't think there are fewer elderly abuse scam victims. I just wonder if they're training them or they're monitoring it on maybe a tighter lens so that when the money does come in, it's just moving that much faster.
I think that I'll start, Steve. I think the adoption of digital assets, cryptocurrency, has played a big role in that, because back in 2017, so just as background, everybody, so back in 2017, we started the Secret Service's Global Investigative Operations Center. It was me, Stephen, and 2 other people, and that was it. And our mandate was go make things happen, because at the time, there was a whole bunch of reasons why we started the Operations Center, but it was really to create a common operating picture across the investigative enterprise to help information sharing. And that's the topic we'll talk a lot about today, is information sharing. And so in 2017, when we started looking at it, business email compromise was then and still is one of the top, or one of the top 2 areas of concern. And so what we would see funds move through different accounts domestically before going overseas. Well, now with the ability for people to use custodial crypto exchanges, think like Coinbase, Kraken, those kinds of things, it's a lot easier to move the money overseas. Steve, do you agree?
100%. And it's the ancillary crimes that are involved in this now too that's making it that much harder to track the money, easier to obfuscate. And what I mean by ancillary crimes are like romance scams. Back when Matt and I started the JIOC in 2017, it was kind of almost like shooting fish in a barrel, right? Because we had a bunch of guys who were what we call witting money mules, meaning they knew what they were doing. They were setting up LLCs in whatever state they were in, going to some bank, getting a bank account with that LLC, and using that to move in launder BEC funds. So as an example, you're buying your house, you get an email from your quote unquote title company, but it's actually a spoofed email. Everything looks good to you. You tell your bank, hey, wire funds to this account, but it's actually a fraudster's account because the title company was compromised. They were using really simple LLCs and easy stuff that we could easily, within about 5 minutes, figure out who it was. And real quick, have our PC and roll and do what we need to do to take down those money mule networks. Now they're using things like romance scam victims and elder abuse victims. I would say probably 90% of all BEC funds are sent to an initial account that's set up by a victim of some other type of crime. And then real quick and easy, move to cryptocurrency or via online banking. You can set up an international wire transfer, and that's all she wrote there to move that money that quickly. So really, they've gotten smarter and smarter using these other layers and kind of an onion version of a crime to pull this off.
I was educating a group of agents and brokers this morning, Stephen. I'd mentioned that before we went live here. And a question came up of, and I get the question all the time, how do the banks allow these fraudsters to walk in and open up these accounts that are clearly fraudulent? And I think we should maybe explain, maybe we pull the layer of that onion 1 layer deep to say, well, these are law-abiding citizens. They're opening an account with their own credentials, or they're using an existing account. They got duped into believing they're in a romance scam or an elderly abuse scam. This could be related to some charity, special interest, whatever. And they actually think they're doing good by somebody. And when we work together to freeze and try to reclaim those funds and move them back to the victims, I think you guys would agree they're as shocked as anybody. And it's hard sometimes to even convince them that what you're saying is true.
Yep. You talked with our good friend Ronnie Togazowski. He does a lot of research on the psychology of the victim, and in this sense, he considers these money mules victims. And so when we're speaking with them and telling them, hey, you know, the relationship you were supposedly in isn't true, it's all a lie, is damaging. It really does hurt people. I had one last week where I had an investigator from a bank reach out to me saying, hey, this lady is in rough shape. She's sitting on like 350 grand from a BEC. Can you just talk to her and tell her, hey, you know, this is in fact a scam and that she's a victim and that, you know, she should just release the money back to the person who sent it. And I ended up talking to the woman on the phone for a while, longer than I wanted to. But it turns out, you know, she was supposed to marry this person. They've been in a relationship for over 2 years before he finally got her bank account, and then simply just use that to start laundering money.
Yeah, we had one in West Michigan last fall. You're aware of it, where she, you know, got a divorce, you know, met somebody online, sold her house, and is now couch surfing with relatives with 2 minor kids in elementary schools.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's sad. So, all right. As Matt mentioned, BEC has remained one of the top cyber crimes. Investment and the proliferation of cryptocurrency scams kind of leapfrogged BEC starting last year as the top crime, otherwise known as pig butchering. This is where they will entice somebody to make a small investment to start in a new crypto wallet. They make a good return, at least on paper. Sometimes they even allow them to pull some of the money or initial investment out, and then they go for the much bigger ask. So they play on greed and opportunistic behavior and senses of individuals, and then they call it pig butchering because at some point they do request a full withdrawal and the money is actually not there, and they cut all communication. Anything you want to address on pig butchering? Otherwise, I'll move to kind of BEC real quick.
I'll just add that it is a massive global problem. And although it's 4.6 billion reported, we think that's just way underreported. There's some public reports through blockchain analytics firms talking 30, 40, 70 billion. I think that's a little high. And this is, as Stephen mentioned, enterprise-wide transnational organized crime in which people are being human trafficked to places like Myanmar, Laos, Cambodia, and working in call centers. The passports taken away, and we can't underscore enough sort of some of the damages that it's being done and how difficult it is to disrupt and dismantle these groups. Because when you have organized crime operating with almost impunity because of their relations with the host government, it creates a real problem. And the other challenge is, much like in money mules, as we talked about earlier, a lot of these folks that are victims thought that they were educated in scams. And these are not, both in money mules, as we were talking about earlier, and in crypto investment scams or pig butchering, these are not like uneducated individuals. They believe that they are educated on scams, and yet they're still being duped. And so some of some obvious things, and I'm only mentioning this, obviously it doesn't necessarily involve this audience per se directly businessly as a business, but I would say personally, you might, with the amount of people that have been compromised in some form or fashion related to this just continues to blow me away. So just continue to have conversations with people, and if you hear somebody saying that they're investing in cryptocurrency, or that, and in many instances, people are actually wiring fiat currency now because of the transactional limits at crypto exchanges. So this is just more for you guys personally. If you hear anybody, if you talk to anybody who says that they're investing in something like this, John Oliver did a really good piece 2 weeks ago on pig butchering. It's definitely worth taking a look.
All right, BEC.
BEC. Oh, sorry, Tom. I wanted to jump in real quick. I had a question for Matt and Steve. It related to Bitcoin and social media. So the question is, criminal took over someone's Facebook account and are now peddling, Bitcoin currency. Any tips or strategies on how to reach out to Meta or Facebook and, get that shut down?
They do have a fraud and abuse contacts, so you can just Google that and take a look and reach out. It does take a little bit for them to get to it just due to the sheer volume of these. And yeah, the social media account takeovers is sort of the next step in pig butchering. As I said, these crimes evolve, and they're always adding in extra layers that I call those ancillary crimes. So social media takeover and then using that to try to convince a friend or family member to send money for a cryptocurrency investment is one of the steps or wrinkles we are seeing. So yeah, so essentially just try to locate the fraud and abuse contacts for Meta and reach out to them, and they will get to it. And just prove your case.
And I'm going to say something that probably Stephen wouldn't say, because it's probably not the most popular thing to say, but social media companies are very slow to protect the users on their platform. And the reason is very simple. They're the product, they're not the customer. And so I deal routinely with victims that reach out for similar type things. And I always remind them that they are not, they're not regulatorily required to jump. The amount of time it takes, even when law enforcement calls them, when it's like somebody of significant, somebody of whatever, I don't want to say influence because that sounds right, but when law enforcement gets involved, it's still not even good enough in that regard. They do a horrid job, in my view, as far as protecting consumers, because again, you're the product, you're not the customer.
Turn multi-factor authentication onto those accounts.
Yes.
Keep them out, right? BEC, just quickly, number 2, cybercrime. Business email compromise is essentially where wire fraud and real estate kind of tucks in from a loss reporting perspective. Tech support really faces those that are on the retired generation. It's the non-tech native cybercrime, if that's an oxymoron, and it sounds like it is, it kind of is. But that's where, hey, your Norton expired or your whatever, and then they get them to wire funds or send money based on something that they truly don't understand. This is kind of what's eye-popping when we saw the stats, is just how the real estate sector has grown in BEC loss. So early days, Matt mentioned it, we were 500 million. That's when we got hit. So real estate was reported in, I think, 17 or 18 sub 500 million. And now, we're approaching that 2.7 billion in loss number. 17% of all losses of BEC are real estate related. I think it's higher. I think real estate in particular is a death by paper cut, because you have a lot of times, I say small amounts, but the average loss on the buyer seller side is right around 80. On the title company side is just under 300, because so many approach the mortgage payoff scams versus the seller net scams. And you can see 10% of all victims in real estate versus the total. Here is what our recovery services team reported in the state of wire fraud report last year. We had a 28% recovery rate on buyers. And we have a recovery services team that if anyone, you, an underwriter, if you're an underwriter, if you're an insurance company, if you're in the mortgage, if you're working with your referral partners on the real estate lending, builder developer side, buyer sellers, we take all that in, and we have a very unique relationship with Stephen and his team to say, let's go work on behalf of the victim. So this is kind of what we saw. You can see on the right, the title company, because of mortgage payoff fraud, has kind of an outsized loss vector. Why those numbers are as low as they are on buyers and sellers, and Stephen, I'd like you to back this up or not. The smaller amounts move faster. And I'm not saying that 72 versus 257 median is a big gap, but we are seeing a lot of times a full depletion of funds. Timing is the most critical component, and mortgage payoffs is one where it's a long tail, but it just seems like the smaller packets of money get splintered and move faster than some of the larger ones.
Yeah.
Agree or not agree?
I agree with that, because they attract less attention, right?
Yeah.
And as I said before, they're using these romance scam victims that have bank accounts that we call seasoned, right? So they've been open for 20 years. They've received, payments for, work payments, they've maybe bought or sold a house before. So the account really flies under the radar for the bank. So 72K coming in isn't going to attract a lot of attention for the bank. And then our money mule is seeing not a very large amount as well. So they're less spooked and so then they're more apt to move the money in the way they're supposed to, and it just looks more feasible that the general or person on oil rig is receiving 70 grand rather than $700,000, so it doesn't attract that much attention, and our money mules can go move that money that much faster, just due to certain limits and limitations that come in with the banks. So yeah, 100%.
All right, what else do we have here? In our report, the most recent ALTA report, this was the cybercrime and wire. So I'm flipping from the certified report now to ALTA's most recent cybercrime and wire fraud report. We reported as an industry that 28% of agents fell victim to some sort of fraud in 2022, and that 17% actually transferred money to a fraudulent account. And it happened more than once on roughly 50% of the companies. And we see that over and over again. If they have success on one brand or in one office, it's like they just start pounding. They just unload on that company or that particular branch.
Yep, they keep going back. They know they keep going back.
Yeah, no, they have a hole, right? They have a hole in procedure, they have a hole in communication, they already have connective tissue, they just jump on another file, or within the same file, they may take, a buyer cash to close that are unsuccessful, but they'll get a mortgage payoff. We've seen that on the same exact file. Back to our report, the State of Wire Fraud Certified Report, we pulled 650 consumers that had bought and sold property in the last few years. 1 in 4 received suspicious communication that they could recall in their transaction. 1 in 10 were targeted for some sort of fraud, either a solicitation or received wiring instructions. 1 in 10 became victimized. And I think these stats paint a more accurate picture. I call it lines in the water. There's just a ton of lines in the water. Mm-hmm. And navigating those lines from both shores is becoming kind of harder and harder. So, all right, that's the warm up. Matt, let's talk about information sharing. You had mentioned it. So why does the Secret Service care about this? Most people think, and I don't mean this in a bad way, you're walking around in penguin suits next to black vehicles. Yeah. And you got comms in your ear and you're protecting very important people. Why do you care about the movement of money? What was the JIOC formed to do? And then kind of fast forward into what you're seeing as far as where does success sit in this area? Like, what are some of those things that we can start to break down and kind of reframe, for the group?
Sure. So that's usually the first question that people ask is when the Secret Service is either Stephen or I would give presentations and say, well, how come the FBI is not here or IRS or something? And it's because the Secret Service was founded in April 1865 in the Department of the Treasury to combat counterfeiting at the close of the Civil War. And it stayed until 2003 with the creation of the Department of Homeland Security. It wasn't until the murder of 3 presidents in 1901 that the agency picked up the responsibility of permanent protection of the president, which then expanded to the vice president and there downstream. So the agency has always had its core sort of investigative focus on protecting the financial integrity of the country is what they say. And so that just means white collar fraud, basically. So it started with counterfeiting. We follow the money in 1865, counterfeiting. And then as money payment systems evolved, the agency continued to evolve to be able to follow the money through whatever payment system that was available at the time. So evolving through wires, ACH, Notch, and all that stuff, all the way through payment cards, so credit card, debit card, gift cards, to real-time payments, to cryptocurrency. The agency has to have really good ability to follow money. And so we still, as Stephen mentioned, have 43 cyber fraud task forces around the country. We've done a really good job. The agency's done a really good job of building up its analytical component. When we started the Global Investigative Operations Center in 2017, the agent to analyst ratio was 55-1. The FBI's, for example, was 8-1. And there was a bunch of reasons for that. Aside from the competing priority of protection, it was because when I came on the job in 1998, and in 1998, I was in our New Haven office, which is part of our New York office, and we would work cases that affected the New Haven office, which was the District of Connecticut. Our victims lived in Connecticut. our defendants, most likely than not, lived in Connecticut, and it was gumshoe type investigative work, trash pulls, interviews, surveillance, undercovers, confidential sources, that kind of stuff. As cybercrime evolved, the agency was slow to evolve, recognizing we need analytical support. Part of the reason is because of the dual mission. They're like the agency for the longest time just continued to hire gun-carrying 1811s. The problem with that is there is that competing priority. So you can get pulled to go do a protection assignment in case EBS. And then so what we came on to do is to sort of serve as the force multiplier for agency operations globally, identify the biggest cases as far as what that means is cross-district, interagency, working with FBI, HSI, Homeland Security Investigations, IRS, CI, Postal Inspection Service, all these OIGs all around the country, state and locals, to work with them to share information, to build out cases, to do what we can to arrest bad actors and then seize their ill-gotten gains. And so the purpose of the JIAC was to do that, to serve as an information sharing center of gravity for the agency to pass out information to our partners through the cyber fraud task forces, whether they were state and local task force officers or folks in private sector that just had an involvement and engagement with those cyber fraud task forces. So that leads to, I retired in 2023, December, a few months ago, and where I've been focused exclusively almost on is information sharing. Because what I found when I was with the service and what I find now is information sharing it's kind of broken. Bad guys talk to each other, and they talk to each other about their tactics, their techniques, their procedures, how they're beating the good guys, us. Who's not doing a good enough job of talking to each other? Us collectively. I'll start with the public to private. People always tout public to private partnerships. That's the way forward. The problem is that it's typically a one-way street where information is brought to public sector, but because without risking the investigation or for whatever reason, the information heading back out is somewhat limited, typically not all that actionable. So that's a challenge. It's good, it's important, as Stephen mentioned earlier, to share information because we can build out cases. But if you think it's going to be like a two-way dialogue, you're probably going to be disappointed because it's not normally how that works. In private sector, it's much more of a disaster as well, in my opinion. The first is under the safe harbor provisions of 314B of the Patriot Act, which was obviously after 9/11 was enacted. It enables banks under the definition of under BSA regulations to share information with each other on terrorism or money laundering under the safe harbor provisions of 314B. The problem is 314B is voluntary, and some banks don't want to do it because they feel like it opens themselves up to regulatory scrutiny that they're not interested in having. The second problem with it is some take a very narrow view of what money laundering means. And all of this that we're talking about today has components of money laundering, but there are some chief counsel in financial institutions that do not subscribe to that belief and are looking for more guidance from FinCEN, from the OCC on what is allowed to be shared. There is not a current process that works in any meaningful way to have financial institutions share information with each other at scale to protect and limit the risk amongst each other and to prohibit new accounts from opening up, that kind of stuff. There's starting to be some progress in that space, but it's very, very slow, and there needs to be some sort of governmental conversation about looking at 314B because it hasn't changed since 2003, and it's been 2004, I think. It's been 22 years since there's been any meaningful change. As far as information sharing goes, as well, is 314A, which is public to private, which means if Stephen has a case and he wants to identify all of the Matt O'Neills with my DOB, social, or even not just my name, you can send out a 314A request through FinCEN to all of the banks, all 18,000 banks around the United States. The problem with that is it's very slow. FinCEN will collect for 2 weeks and batch the requests to go out to banks, and banks have 2 weeks to reply. So theoretically, and not really theoretically, in practice, it might take you 28 days to get information back.
And then
go ahead.
that information is limited too. It doesn't give us, it just says yes or no. Are they banked at that bank? But then we
And
still
that's it. Yeah. And so where we need to get to eventually is cross-industry information sharing at scale that's lawful using things like privacy-enhancing technologies, whereas social media and ISPs and telcos and hosting providers and financial institutions are all lawfully sharing information. But there are so many challenges that are taking place right now because many folks in private sector are not allowed to share information, period, because there is no safe harbor provisions for Meta to share with LinkedIn, to share with Match, to share. And so that remains a massive challenge that needs to be overcome, because otherwise these losses that we're talking about today, they're going to be 4 times this much in 5 years. It's just not acceptable.
I think you're right, Matt. So how this represents itself in a recovery, right? So we don't want it to happen, but let's play out the fact that somebody just learned that money landed in an account and it was not the intended recount, or wherever it is money launderer, if it's a romance scam victim that's been flipped into money laundering unwittingly. These numbers here paint, I think, a very accurate picture that the FI receiving, so it always goes from what we see from a domestic bank to another domestic FI, and then something else happens. And the something else is withdrawal of cash, purchase of gift cards, cryptocurrency wallet gets opened, money gets transferred, cashier's checks get, pulled out and sent. But they're ahead of us. If there's any area that they're way ahead of us, I think it's in the fact that they know our incident response is a bit of a box of chocolates, because the receiving FI has no duty to respond or even communicate back what they're seeing in that account. So I'm going to tee up UCC Article 4A. We're in the process of doing a deep analysis right now of court cases around the country involving wire fraud. And they essentially have, I'm going to say, full immunity, that the banks will look at any state or federal case filed against them. And the only obligation that I can see, as the courts are willing to enforce, is to say, you met the know your customer requirement at account opening. That's easy. That's a quick sniff test, because these are law-abiding citizens. You mentioned it, Matt, 9 out of 10 times. And then as long as we validated that it was actually the account holder that sent the funds, then what happened after that, we have absolutely no duty or obligation. They don't even have a duty to respond, and there was a court case on this recently, to the fact that they were alerted to a wire transfer at their fraud desk and they sat on it and the money subsequently moved. And I think that's where I have a challenge as an industry participant, because the deck is essentially stacked against us, because wire fraud is a voluntary transfer of funds. I mean, think about that. In most crimes, right? Someone isn't under duress. There isn't some situation where human life or safety is at risk, and then something happens out of their will. They're willingly transferring funds. They just don't understand they've been completely social engineered, and the rail that they're sending those through is controlled by the fraudster. So I agree, the information sharing under the acts of the Patriot Act are one thing, but the banks have full flyover cover under UCC Article 4A.
Yeah, and a lot of it is education. A lot of it is, there seems to be a shift as well, at least conversations taking place in this country as a result of seeing fraud losses go down in the UK and Australia, where the liability has shifted to financial institutions in some instances related to frauds and scams and wire frauds. And so I'm aware that there's been some Senate Banking Committee conversations. There's some other sort of groups that are producing reports inside the government saying, is it time to have a conversation to make financial institutions financially, if it affects their P&L sheet, they're going to start to get more involved, and they're going to be incentivized to start sharing information.
All right, Stephen, we're going to flip to you on the investigative side. I want to make one more point here, because unfortunately, when the fraud recovery services team at Certified and then the JIAC get involved, there are cases where we have to educate the sending bank on what to do to notify the receiving bank to recall a wire, to issue a hold harmless, to get the ball rolling. If any of, and I'm gonna just pick on the smaller brands or regional and smaller banks and community banks, not because I don't like them, but a lot of times they don't have the sophistication and full like fraud departments that the major FIs have. If you haven't had this conversation with your financial institution, and I don't care if it's a community bank, a regional bank, a credit union, that if I learn of a wire fraud because I have a buyer in a closing room, or I learned that I wired a mortgage payoff and it was not received, you need to run that conversation through to the end before one happens. It will significantly impact your chance of success. Because if we have to get involved and educate the president of community banks, like we have many, many times, on what this whole thing even means, we're burning precious time and daylight to get a recovery. All right, Stephen, you are in the trench, my man. You have been, you choose to be. You're a freak of nature, you and Ronnie and Matt. What are you seeing? What is keeping you up at night right now? And how has it changed over the last, let's just tighten the lens, of 6 to 9 months with the advent of AI and some of the other technologies?
Yeah, so real estate sector is still very vulnerable. We've talked about the reasons ad nauseum. There's no muscle memory for the buyer. There's a high number of transactions. There's a lot of pressure in the situation, and even the psychology behind it, right? And one of the things I want to talk about is AI and generative AI in particular. And to make it personal for myself, I just did a thought experiment a few months back where, I used generative AI, one of the platforms, to write an email for me to convince a home buyer to send their payment to a cryptocurrency wallet instead of a legitimate bank account. Now put yourself in my shoes, right? Middle-aged, I have a 3-month-old, a 3-year-old.
You're not middle-aged.
As you know, I'm super busy, right? Super tired. I have a lot going on, and I'm not, but imagine I'm in the process of buying a house, right? And I'm not in this field. I don't know anything about this. It's, the second house I'm buying. I have a lot going on. I don't know the system. I get an email that's very well written that says, "Hey, Mr. Doherty, we see your closing's coming up. This is your title company. Everything looks good." The email is 1 letter off. They really did a good job with the spoof. It maybe not even 1 letter off. Maybe they're using a Cyrillic replacement for the domain now. Is another thing we're seeing, where it looks like an A, but it's actually just a Russian A, and it's still coming through the domain that way. So I get this email that says, "Hey, just to let you know, we've decided to accept cryptocurrency as payment for your down payment. So if you want, just send us cryptocurrency to this wallet here." Well, it's 10 o'clock at night. I'm sitting on my couch. I just got both my kids to bed. I just want to have a beer and relax. And I know tomorrow I have to go to the bank, take time out of my day to send this wire, where now I can just go into my banking app and go into my crypto app, move my funds I need for my down payment to my crypto wallet, and then boom, send that off of my phone. You can do it within minutes. How easy is that, right? And you play on the psychology of the victim in that way to really trick them. And that's what we're seeing now with our bad actors using AI. Because a lot of the old different red flags we used to push, like, guys, how many times have we seen in the wire transfer instructions that our fraudster sends, they say the word routine number instead of routing number? How many times have we seen that?
Right.
I would always say, if you see the word routine number in your wiring instructions, it is 100% a scam. I don't care if it is or not, but consider it that. Now, using generative AI, it got rid of that. It always says routing number. The grammar's all perfect, so all those red flags are out. So our bad actors really are embracing technology as they are wont to do, and using things like AI. Tom, you and I have talked about spoof card, right? And creating deep fakes. So think about that. Think about that extra layer now you can add to your fraud scheme. So I'm a fraudster. I know that this person A is buying a house, right? I send them an email with the new wiring instructions. Then I use that technology called spoof card to call them, use a deep fake of the title officer that I found a recording of, and have it sent straight to voicemail, because that's what spoof card can do. So now you got an email in your Gmail inbox, and you have a voicemail from your title officer, both confirming that those wire instructions sent by the fraudster are correct, right? So now our bad actors can just layer their fraud schemes to make it that much better and that much more effective. And that's really kind of what we're seeing on the horizon and even occurring now. There was a $25 million deepfake BEC that happened a few weeks ago in Hong Kong. A financial officer of a company gets a Zoom link to join a Zoom meeting with his colleagues to talk about some stuff they had going on. He joins the Zoom link. He sees 3 or 4 of his colleagues. They're all having kind of casual conversations. So he's put at ease. He's like, all right, cool. And those deepfakes convinced him to send $25 million to a fraudulent account. So that's how kind of complex we're starting to see these trends go. And then on the other side, we're seeing them write better phishing emails, because BEC, right? Let's stress the term BEC, business email compromise. So there's always a compromise that has to go on for the most part. And generally what they do is they try to figure out a way to log into an email system, set up email rules and log out, and then just monitor the emails that way, right? Now to write their phishing emails to get those credentials, to get somebody to click on something that's going to get your username and password, they're using also generative AI and other tactics to make it better. Phishing emails used to be pretty easy to spot once you had just a little bit of training, you know, a 5-minute video, this is a phishing email. Now they're so well written using the technology that's out there that they're almost indistinguishable from a real email. So those are sort of the latest trends and threat vectors we're seeing. Recent case examples, I mean, we're inundated to say the least. I talked about the hospital that got hit. So the one thing I do want to stress is our bad actors are becoming more and more indiscriminate by the day. They don't care who they target. As long as there's a financial transaction involved, they are going to target it. So not only do you have to think about it in the real estate sector, you have to think about it in other ways too. You know, am I sending money here? Am I sending money there? You know, you really need to think about where you're sending your money and be careful about it, because these guys are targeting everything. They don't care. And lastly, just I want to kind of talk about exploitation factor. So exploitation factor is a term used in ransomware. I've usurped it to use it across all trends of, or all facets of cyber fraud, and that means they're going to go back and try to attack you again. We're seeing it a lot with businesses that get hit. We'll talk to a business that says, hey, we've had a lot of payroll diversions come in. I'm like, yeah, well, what's been going on? And like, well, we had this weird thing a few months ago where, you know, one of our clients lost money. We had a breach in our email system, but we got rid of that and it's fine. Well, it's not fine, because while they were in there, they stole a bunch of other information, and now they're using that for further fraud down the line, whether that's buying and selling PII, whether that's, you know, compromising other clients or vendors, what have you. They're going back to the barrel to keep hitting you again. So if you are a victim of one of these fraud schemes, make sure you're covering all your bases to prevent any further follow-on attacks.
So other than just closing our escrow accounts down, guys, what do we do? I mean, what do we do really? We talk about incident response. I do think, and ALTA has a really, really good, the InfoSec committee did a great job of putting together an incident response plan. If you don't have, I mean, that is the worst day of your life. I've been there, guys, thankfully, knock on wood, not since 2015, but it was intense enough that we didn't want to repeat that. It led to creating CertifID, but having a solid incident response plan and running that plan through is absolutely critical. Stephen had mentioned a list of the field offices. We have fraud recovery services, but that's just the monetary loss. I mean, we've heard of ransomware. I just got another update from Norton last week on spring break that the AT&T breach of 2021 got republished on the dark web. So that's another 22 million records that got put onto the top of the pile. And then it gave me a list of, you know, here's all these sites that I hope you change your password between now and then. So where do we go? I want to kind of end this with, you know, some key takeaways.
So real quick, I would say bad actors are using technology, use technology yourselves in order to verify transactions, all transactions. Verify who you're sending it to, and that is that person. Whether it's using tools like CertifID, whether that's picking up the phone. So many people are loath to actually speak to anybody anymore. Verify before you send anything. That's the first. And the second, from a personal level, all of these large account data compromises with PII, you need, from a personal perspective, you need to freeze your credit. Equifax, Experian, TransUnion, iNovis, check systems, you need to freeze your credit. Doesn't affect your credit score, just prohibits bad actors from establishing new lines of credit in your name.
Yeah, I'm finishing a full handout right now, Matt, of how to freeze your credit and the steps to take if you know your credit has been compromised. Stephen and I just finished a pretty significant deep dive into a seller impersonation op, and they had the actual property owners full PII. bank account in his name, driver's license, and the guy was absolutely smoked. And that's just terrifying. And if you don't think your information is not out there and not readily accessible, either for free or a few bucks, you're going to learn on the back end of that is just not true.
4 cents is what your identity is worth online. We bought 10 million social security numbers, full PII for $6,000. That's wholesale. Retail is about 4 cents. I could buy anybody on this call's name, DOB, social address, previous address, mother's maiden name for about 4 cents. And I arrested a guy one time, I had over 1,000 credit reports in his email inbox. And he was the guy to vet money mules, because these bad guys don't want to give their money to somebody who isn't credit worthy. So they're actually pulling credit reports, and then they're using it to monetize later downstream. Dormant accounts, like Stephen talked about, new account fraud. But again, just one more reason why you want to make sure your credit is frozen.
But you can freeze your credit. You can also get a PIN number from the IRS so they can't file taxes in your name. You can go to the Department of Labor and make sure they can't file unemployment. There's other layers. I completely agree with you, Matt. That's the first stop for them to monetize any type of credit. But there are other things on the back end with identity loss. That's a huge issue.
Yes.
All right.
And then I'll just real quick, just to have a plan in place, have your contacts before something happens, and treat these situations as a when it happens, not an if it happens, right? As we've seen with the numbers, it's only a matter of time before you may get attacked. So have a plan in place, have it practiced, and definitely educate and train your employees and those around you to be able to see these scams, and then report it as soon as you can, because we can definitely help. Even if it's an attempt, there's probably other fraud associated with it. So yeah, it's paying it forward, helping your community, helping other businesses. So that's what I have.
I think with all the disruption that's taking place in real estate, so quickly, Jeremy, in 60 seconds, we're going to see more unrepresented buyers. You have listing agents that don't want to take on dual agency. They don't want to do a transaction coordination. They're going to contact their lender and say, well, what do I do now? Right. And I think this is a winning strategy for the companies that have made the investments, that have the technology and the layers of technology. This is everything from how it comes into the building to how the emails are being sent out and verified, to even training. We use a platform called Ningio for our training for employees on phishing and social engineering, but there are many others. But educating your market, I was, as a title owner, educating about 500 agents and brokers this morning on seller impersonation and what that looks like. And I think that's one of the leading strategies, is continuing education, engagement, and then just being transparent with your staff that I can't prevent this stuff from coming in. We're not necessarily a target more than anyone else, but here's what it looks like, right? The shame and blame has a place somewhere else, but it's not a place that you miss the opportunity to educate people that are going to be your human firewall, is what I say, on a desktop by desktop basis.
Wow, thanks, Tom. Thanks, Steve, Matt. Hopefully everyone on the call doesn't feel defeated. So there are lots of tools available to implement and help safeguard and mitigation efforts. I had a quick poll I wanted to launch and ask what mitigation efforts your operation is implementing. Tom mentioned education. There are tools to educate your employees about phishing scams or wire payee verification software. So if you all want to take a second to vote what you're doing, you can vote all three. There are multiple choice options. Tom, looks like education is number one. Number two, wire verification software, followed by simulated phishing testing of employees. We do have a few, well, we're at the top of the hour. Wanted to pitch a few questions to speakers. I understand if you guys have other commitments you gotta jump to. Couple of questions on the reporting. Should people report even attempted scams, or only if there was an actual loss?
I can take that one. So yes, please report attempted scams. Again, our job is to arrest these individuals. However, another part of that is disrupting, dismantling the networks they are using. And these guys are using the same networks to commit other types of fraud or other fraud schemes. So just by reporting something can help us take down a bank account, take down a domain, target an IP, target an email address if we have to. So reporting is key, even if it is just an attempt.
I would go one step further, and maybe you wouldn't recommend this, Stephen, but if you have the grit for it and you know it's a scam, but you're only at the email level, try to get some bank information. Try to see where they would receive money, because that's the real pay it forward for somebody that may be using an account that somebody else has been victimized. We've helped so many people along the way, millions and millions of dollars recovered for people that didn't know they were scammed just because we got a hold of an active mule account. So just stay in it a minute, at least try to get the bank credentials and then report that up through.
Any other guidance as far as reporting agencies they should be reporting to?
Yeah, so we talked about IC3.gov. That's awesome. Their data really tells us what the trends are. They have a team that reviews everything that comes in, if there's anything actionable. FTC Consumer Sentinel is another one you can report to. And then you can contact our Secret Service field offices by, again, secretservice.gov/field offices.
All right, I sent that out to a few people who asked. So the follow-up was, well, is Nitro more effective than reporting to IC3?
It's a different aspect. So with Nitro, we're going to generally come out to meet with you. It's very more localized. So you'll get somebody from a local office to come out and meet with you, rather than with IC3. It's a national program, actually international now. So it's just different. And Nitro is for, if you have a serious compromise, you want us to come out. If you have a POS system issue where they're stealing credit cards, a BEC where we need to look at an email environment, stuff like that.
Okay. All right. I had a few questions on the resources. I posted it in the link for the rapid response plan that Tom mentioned and the outgoing wire prep checklist. That's available at alta.org/topics/wire-fraud. The URL is in the chat, so that's a lot to remember. And then one last question. There's a lot of variations to all these crimes and attacks. Have you guys seen an increase in like lender fraud, where the lender is a fake? It's a online lender, and they claim that they operate in X amount of states. But if you dig into it, if you call, the phone number is disconnected. The Google map is an apartment building, and basically the criminals have set up a fake lender, created a fake account, and just basically trying to steal the money.
So we've seen this in some of our recovery efforts, where they set up fake looking banks to convince romance scam victims that there's money in an account for them. The one that ended up essentially homeless with their kids here in West Michigan, sold their house and sent, a few $100,000 under the ruse that, this boyfriend needed to pay a tax at the bank, and then it would unlock over $3 million that was in an account in her name. And it had her picture, it had her account name, it showed a balance, it showed pending, it looked legitimate. And through the JIOC, we pierced through that, and there was, it was all a ruse. I think the other thing, Jeremy, when rates go down, I think there's going to be a tremendous amount of refinance fraud. So if I can get, Matt said, it's 10 cents, 9 cents, I'm kind of offended by that, Matt, but I'm not going to argue them, then why not just look at unencumbered property, spin up a full ID, and then just start doing cash out refinances?
Well, Tom, yeah, when the next refi boom happens, and I'm parsing this in with the Biden administration's proposal to, the title waiver program, for waiving title insurance on some refis and removing the safeguard of what the industry provides. It will be a train wreck, just opening the door.
I think we're headed for that. I think we're also unrepresented buyers. I mean, we're the last line of defense, right? And I think we all on this call need to be educating our lawmakers on the work that Secret Service and companies like Matt are doing to say, look, on a micro level, there's a small problem. on a macro level, we have an industry that's really under a tremendous amount of pressure in all directions. And without over-indexing on public policy, which we don't want them to do, we need to do a better job of educating them to say we spill our guts on every single closing table to make sure everybody's safe, it's a good closing experience, and the funds are moving properly right now. And we can't price that risk into the industry. That's the problem. You can't increase the title insurance rates because most are regulated. You can't increase the closing fee. So where does this underpriced risk go? And it's on the industry's shoulders, and they need to know that. Yeah.
All right. Well, we went a little bit past the hour, so apologize for that. But Matt, Steve, Tom, thank you for sharing your expertise and knowledge on cybersecurity and the wire fraud trends. Obviously, as you guys mentioned, the volume is going up. Not going to probably go down anytime soon, but hopefully with continued education, mitigation efforts, we can beat the odds and keep people's money protected. With that,
if we weren't doing this, it'd be a lot worse. I mean, that's the reality. If we weren't doing this, it'd be a lot worse because it's just so much attention is being flooded into wire fraud right now.
That's right. All right. As a reminder, you'll get a link with the recording tomorrow. Also, we'll include a link to get a copy of the presentation. And with that, that will bring us to the conclusion of today's webinar. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.